Jim Purcell, irrigation consultant from the Namoy Valley, answers the question of whether it is economical to purchase a centre pivot or a lateral move.
The first step is, what is the appropriate irrigation technology for your farm and particularly your soil? I really make a strong point of this. There's no good putting a sprinkler-based machine on a hard-setting red-brown earth where the water just won't get into the root zone. Remembering irrigation is all about getting water into the root zone for the crop to use. If you've got a machine on a soil that's not suitable, no, it's definitely not, and you'll kick yourself for doing it. If the soil, on the other hand, is suitable for a centre pivot lateral move, in other words, it allows plenty of infiltration into the soil, and it's the right soil for the machine to work in terms of wheel tracks and infiltration rate, yes. Labour savings great, convenience factor's good, pre-irrigation is a controlled exercise with surface irrigation. When you pre-irrigate a soil, it'll take as much water as it can take. With a centre pivot or lateral move, you can dictate how much water you put in there. That's a big advantage of centre pivot and lateral move and drip. The disadvantage is that you haven't got the capacity with centre pivot and lateral move often to make up for a breakdown or make up for a very, very hot spell or a dry season to start with. So it's horses for courses a bit. The other thing to remember with the centre pivot and lateral move is it's a different operation system. Somebody that's been traditionally surface irrigating, when they change over to a lateral move or centre pivot, it's a new game. And it's a new approach, and there's new techniques, and there's a fairly steep learning curve. So somebody just starting off new with a machine will make a lot of mistakes, which is perfectly natural. But budget that into your system. Don't think you're going to buy a machine and then suddenly be the top grower in the district because you've got a new toy. That doesn't work. It takes a few years to learn how to use the machine, learn the traps, pick which sprinkler package is best for you, or should you be using a leaper system. You know, there's a lot of different things that you need to go through to be a successful grower. You've got to look at the overall cost of any machine, and that's broken up into the cost to purchase the machine, the cost to run the machine, and the cost to maintain and look after the machine. So there's really, and there's also labour. So it's a whole package. Farmers are very good at packages. They've got to look after a lot of things, and they've got to basically pay for the machine, pay for the energy it takes to run the machine, pay for the labour, and also the maintenance. So you really need to look at all four. When you're getting a quote from somebody, ask them for all four. Now the hardest one the machine supplier is going to have is the labour. So probably the farmer can answer that one. But let's look at the other three. When you get a price from a supplier, get the purchase price. But then also find out what the energy cost is of that machine is, and then what the maintenance cost of that machine is. Because ultimately, each year, you're going to have to either pay off the loan to buy it, or you've got an opportunity cost of that money that you're using up. So you've got to pay back the capital cost or the purchase price. You've got to supply energy to the machine by way of diesel or electric, and you've got to maintain it. So really, those three costs all should be considered together. And the way we do that is we'll take the purchase price and we'll amortise that, or we'll break that down to an annual cost per year over, say, 15 or 20 years, and say it costs this much per year to own it, it costs this much per year to run it, and it costs this much per year to maintain it. Add those together, and one of those machines is actually going to be the cheapest. And it's generally not the cheapest to buy. And that's the message. That's a simple message. It's not just the purchase price, it's the overall cost. Consultants like us can calculate it, but also the machine suppliers who know their machines better than anybody should be able to produce that. So the smart thing to do for a grower is to ask your machine supplier for a quote and ask for the capital price, the operational price, and the maintenance price. Now they can give you that, and in fact during the design process they would consider using different pipe sizes for the main line or different pipe sizes on the towers, and one's cheaper capital wise or purchase wise, but it'll cost more to run because a smaller pipe takes more energy to push the water through. So if you drop the capital cost, you may be rising the operation cost too high. So ask them. And if they can't supply that, well, there are consultants like us who can help that supplier if they need it, or help the grower calculate that. It's not rocket science, but it is just a procedure of breaking all your costs down to an annual cost, add them all together and say, this machine costs so much per year, this machine costs so much per year, which do I want to do? Now, it's not always the case that you want to buy the cheapest. Overall even, you may have a situation where your cash flow is quite tight now, and you can only afford a lower capital cost now. Well, that's a legitimate decision, provided you know that. As long as you realise that over 20 years, this machine that you're buying cheaper now will actually be more expensive in the long run. That's fine, as long as you understand that. The frustration that both suppliers and consultants like me have is a farmer's presented with two quotes from two different manufacturers. One's $30,000 cheaper. I'll take it. And you think, whoa, 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 it's not. It's $30,000 cheaper to buy, but it could be $50,000 or $60,000 dearer overall. So we're looking for an educated assessment by the grower and an objective options presented by the supplier. If I was a supplier, I'd offer my farmer a couple of options. Look, you can have this one, it's a little bit cheaper to buy, but it's a little bit more expensive to run. Or you can have this one, which we recommend, which is probably the optimum. It's a little bit dearer to buy, but overall, over the next 15 or 20 years, it's going to be the cheapest. Now, the other thing to remember is that energy is only going to go one way, and energy is the prime operation cost. So if you buy a machine that's cheap to buy but high to run now, you're really going to be kicking yourself in 5 or 10 years' time when energy costs suddenly go up. So you need to do a bit of a sensitivity analysis on those energy costs. So today's energy costs, it costs this much per year. If energy costs go up 20%, what does it cost? Ooh, all of a sudden, the more expensive machine to buy up front becomes the cheapest overall. And that's the message. It's a simple message, but it's a good one.
Having made the decision to purchase a machine and design a system, you need to obtain quotes from different suppliers. The key things to consider when assessing suppliers and quotes are how long to deliver and commission the machine, what sort of backup service and parts are available, are the quotes directly comparable, are you comparing apples with apples? Independent consultants are available to compare quotes if the irrigator is uncomfortable doing this. However, the irrigator still needs to ask the right questions to ensure they understand the irrigation system they are purchasing.
My experience tends to be that the price speaks loudest, and very often to the detriment to the customer, I believe, to the end user. And if he's unfortunate enough to obtain a quote which has gone at the bare bones in terms of the system capacity and has come at the lowest possible price, I often find the customer then focuses on that price, whereas really my advice would be he needs to understand first what he requires that's going to achieve what he needs to achieve, and then try to understand whether the budget behind that is then going to fit what his needs are. If the budget then doesn't fit the needs, then the needs may need to change to fit the budget. But to try and, it's not a one size fits all. You need to, why are we irrigating? We're irrigating to successfully grow a crop. Well, there's no point in spending a lot of money and then unsuccessfully growing a crop. You rather spend less money, have a lesser crop, but then grow that crop really, really well. They really need to spend time drilling down and do the homework, do the research, and drill down into each quote and try to make sure they're comparing apples with apples at the end of the day. Don't focus at the bottom line. There will be, if you were to try and put in every single aspect of every single piece of equipment, each customer would end up with a book. There's just simply not the time and the resources to be able to do that. So he really needs to drill down to try and ascertain exactly what it is he's being offered and what the claim is that system's going to do from their salesman.
The suppliers were very helpful. We sought quotes from about 4 different suppliers. We did recall on our own experience from the past years of probably 50 years of irrigating, but at the end of the day we wanted a system that was didn't have too many losses of friction losses in the pipeline, and that would be efficient right from the pump right through to the when it gets delivered to the ground. So then with the help of the suppliers we designed jointly a system that would cater for that. Main lines, we put in main lines that were a 10-inch diameter. We could have got away with possibly an 8-inch diameter and used a bit more pressure, but creating less efficiencies. And the pivot itself, the first 2 towers, we've got 8-inch pipe in them, stepping down to a 6-inch on the rest of the towers. And yeah, like dollars can be saved by having that little efficiencies all the way through the line. Like with, you don't need too much extra power consumption to increase the fuel usage, then you increase the dollars on the cost of fuel.
The next stage after purchasing the machine is to have it installed and commissioned. It is important as the purchaser to check that the machine being installed is as per the design specifications. The irrigator can check this themselves, or at the very minimum, ensure that good communication exists with the installer. It is important to check who is responsible for insurance of the machine during installation and before final handover. For some suppliers, commissioning would involve putting water through the machine and checking pressures. However, it is good practice by the buyer to request a more rigorous inspection. This needs to be negotiated with the supplier when purchasing the machine, as it will incur additional cost. A more rigorous commissioning process would entail checking all bearings are greased, all sprinkler sizes and positions, sprinkler ground clearance, tyre pressures, operating pressures, and end gun operation, span alignment, travel speed calibration, water application calibration, that water isn't accumulating around towers, that the machine does not collide with existing infrastructure, for example trees, existing machines, power poles or storages. It is good practice to complete a full run dry before final handover. If the irrigator chooses not to pay the supplier to undertake this additional testing, it is recommended that they complete the check themselves.
It goes back before you pay for it. All of ours are GPS surveyed into every paddock. And part of the deal on that GPS surveying is there's no trees inside the circle, and that might sound simplistic, but you'd be surprised the number of times. And the other part is that we will not pay for a machine commissioning until we've run one circle dry and one circle fully wet, and we've checked all our pressures and everything like that. And it might sound fairly mundane, but you'd be surprised there'll be little bits of dirt in pipes when they're commissioning it. It'll block a Nelson valve, or something will happen, or they'll wire an end gun back to front, and these are just little things that happen, but you'll find that all the installers will fix it up very quickly if they haven't been paid.
It is best practice to undertake a system assessment. Ideally, this should use the American Society of Agricultural Engineers procedure or the Australian equivalent. This ensures water is being applied evenly to maximise potential yield. The assessment can also identify issues with the pump and machine. The assessment can be conducted by the supplier or an independent consultant. The main components of a system assessment include checking and interpreting system capacity, correct sprinkler installation, pressures, flow rates, speed and application calibration, and uniformity. Again, the irrigator can check most of these things themselves. Assessing the uniformity of the system would be difficult, but an independent consultant can do this. A system assessment should ideally be completed at commissioning or before final payment.
Just as important, once the job is finished, and is the commissioning of that machine to make sure that you're getting what you paid for. It's a little late when you find out 12 months after that you know, the sprays haven't been applying the water in a uniform fashion, and this has affected your yield. You need to know that as soon as the machine is being commissioned.
In some circumstances, growers may inherit an older machine through a property purchase or other means. In these situations, it is recommended that independent advice is sought on the design and operation of the system. This could entail the completion of a system assessment. Each system has its own design specifications. The serial number can generally be found inside the control box. This serial number can be used by the local supplier of that machine brand to see if they know the history of the machine and can supply the design specs. In some cases, you may need to get this information directly from the manufacturer. The system may need to be reconfigured and strategies developed to retrofit the machine.
I have a test kit in the back of my car, and nearly every client you go and see who's got an old machine, that's the first thing they'll tell you what's wrong with it. A lot of it you can see what's wrong with it. You can see that it's got a very old sprinkler pack, or it doesn't have pressure regulators on it, or they're not putting the right amount of water on, or they don't have the right amount of pressure to operate the machine, because a lot of them, when they were first designed, they never took into account differences in elevation for some reason. There's really some pretty fundamental things, but one of the first things I do is go and test the pressure at the end of the machine, and 9 times out of 10 you can find that is incorrect, and you can normally trace back and find out where the problem is. I mean, it gets to the point where growers now can ring you up and you can ask them where their problem is, and I've got a pretty fair idea where to go to start looking. But yeah, we do a lot of that. A lot of it's just updating the sprinkler packages and going back to the really basic stuff of saying, well, you're not putting enough water on here, or you haven't got enough pressure.
We even have situations where customers have bought farms with a more secure water and then actually move the centre pivot from the old farm and put it onto the new farm. And when it gets there, it then needs to be bigger, for example, or you're able to change the application rate. So we then increase the length, put in bigger spans with bigger pipe diameters to carry more water and change the sprinkler system. So yeah, we see that quite often. We avoid second-hand machines because our experience has shown that second-hand machines are a money pit, and my advice to farmers are, be very, very wary